there is immense economic value that can come from building AI and AI tools that promotes human flourishing instead of human addiction.
There is a wave of addiction coming. I'm Jake Ward. This is The Rip Current. We look at the big invisible forces acting on us each day. And if you thought addiction was bad, and you guys, it's already bad, right? Fentanyl deaths are among one of the top causes of accidental death in the United States. Gambling on sports is rising and rising as more and more states legalize gambling by phone. One gambling addict told me that having to walk around with a phone in his pocket now that you can bet on games through it is like being an alcoholic who has to carry a fifth of vodka everywhere he goes. It is, social media perpetrating an enormous amount of compulsive behavior. I'm not immune to that. All of this is part of an epidemic of addiction that I think, for-profit addiction that I think has really got us by the throat. And this week's guest, Zachary Gidwitz, his whole theory, his thesis is that we're about to see a lot more of that thanks to AI. So he's fighting fire with fire. He's creating systems that allow people to fight against addiction, to get into treatment with the help of AI chatbots. He's trying to smooth people's path into real help using this. And he's a very unusual guy. He came to me years ago having read The Loop, my book. And as a founder, he said, I want your counsel on how to make my company the right way so I don't do it unethically, so I don't accidentally wind up preying on people's psychological vulnerabilities as opposed to trying to help them with them. I really respected that. And so I've been in touch with him over the years, and this conversation is a conversation we've been having for quite a while about the difference between creating real help for people who are in addiction and creating some kind of for-profit alternative to human therapy, which he and I agree is not the outcome we should be looking for. Whether, and how we deal with addiction is going to be, I think, one of the make or break questions of American civic and legal life in our generation. And I hope you enjoy this hour-long exploration of that same question with Zachary Gidwitz. Tell us about Open Recovery. What are you seeking to do? How did you come to the idea? Let's do that first.
All right, sounds good. So I run Open Recovery, which is a company that is trying to make addiction recovery and mental health tools accessible to anyone who needs them. And the way in which we're doing that is we're sort of confronting the problem that, in fact, we don't really understand how behavioral change works. We don't understand how recovery works, not in a fully scientific way. There have been many different methodologies that have shown varying levels of efficacy, and some of them really have saved, I'll just say, millions of people. But in terms of just having a general model of mental health, of addiction and recovery, I say we are far away from an end goal.
I'll just jump in and say Dr. Keith Humphreys is an addiction specialist from Stanford and the VA, and he was a guest on the show, and he made the same point. He said that basically with cancer, with the common cold, well, cancer is a tough one, but like with other forms of disease, here's the intervention, and here is the likely outcome from that intervention. You know how likely it is to work. And he said, with addiction, there is no such thing. We have some ideas that like the 12 steps have worked well for alcoholics. AA has worked for alcoholics. But other than that, there's really no idea. And it sounds like that is still true.
That's absolutely right. And, I'd be happy to share more about my own personal experience because, like you said, for some people, something as traditional and old as the 12 steps, which is 90 years old, has just changed their lives, and that's all they've needed. I know other people, I'm very close with people who have gone to inpatient treatment, rehab, 17 times. And on time 17, it worked. So why? Why did that work then for them, right? What is the right intervention for the right person delivered in the right way at the right time? That level of customization, personalization is likely what we would need to really have any sort of system that is going to have a high probability of delivering successful interventions. And the level of data that we've been able to collect to date is just completely lacking. And if we even had that amount of data before some of the newest tools that have come out, we wouldn't have been able to properly crunch the numbers and sort of have new insights. And that's really what open recovery is about, is collecting that experience and trying to figure out new understandings that can be made accessible to people all over.
And as I understand it, you are looking at addiction in many forms. It is you're hoping to improve recovery when it comes to drugs and alcohol, but you also, I remember years ago when we first talked, you predicted to me a coming wave of addiction that you thought would be facilitated by the technologies that we are making, by AI.
Yes.
Tell me more. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. And this is very much in the founding story of our company in a few different ways. So personally, I've been in recovery for over 9 years. But my addiction doesn't have anything to do with drugs or alcohol. My addiction is much more what we call a process addiction or behavioral addiction. So for me personally, I've struggled with pornography addiction for, gosh, I think even before I hit puberty.
Hmm.
And it's just gotten worse.
And how old are you? What era are we talking?
Right. So I'm 38 now. And so back then, I remember my earliest experience was sneaking down to my mother's office in her basement, in the basement. And it was one of those colorful iMacs, that sort of,
Right. The Johnny
thing
Ive
that, yeah,
iMac. Right.
exactly. So interesting to see him still in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Excited to see what he's going to do. But I went to some paid pornographic website, and it just printed out in a black and white printer the front page of that web page,
Hmm.
and that was my first thing. So that probably ages me, appropriately. You know where technology was
But
then.
it's interesting, right? Because that is like there was this, prior to that, you might have, I mean, I was the kind of kid who would, in the, what would that have been, the 80s, I would stand in front of the scrambled cable channel, which at that time was, the audio came through from
Mm,
the forbidden adult channels, but the image was scrambled. But scrambled such that you could kind of see a little bit, and I would stand there and try and catch a glimpse, if I could, and listen to the sound of it. And if I'd had the internet available to me at that era, I think I would have been in a whole different world. So it's just interesting that was, it just had to do with the age you happened to have been when the internet came out.
and if it were, if I were just going through puberty now with today's society and technology, I mean, I honestly don't know what would have happened, and I'm terrified.
So let's talk about that, right? What is coming for kids like us, right,
Mm.
who may have a tendency toward a kind of, it's interesting, I hadn't known the term process addiction. In this era, what do you think is coming for those kids?
Yeah. So, people will ask me, how do you know if you're addicted, right? And people, when they find out, I have a pornography addiction, different digital addictions, they'll say, well, I watch porn every night. Are you saying I'm an addict? And I always ask two questions. I say, do you want to stop? And if they say no, I say, have fun. Right? God bless. I've been able to enjoy a drink or two. I'm not an alcoholic. It doesn't help me at all. And in my recovery, so I've pretty much, cut most of that out anyway. But yeah, it's nice to be able to have a drink if you don't have an addiction to it. The second question is it making your life unmanageable? Now that's using language from the 12 steps, which really did work for me, but it's a fairly objective question. Are you trying to stop and your life is falling apart and you just can't stop it, even in the face of all of these consequences?
Hmm.
So that I think a lot of people can probably relate to, not just from drugs, alcohol, not just from pornography, maybe online gaming, maybe gambling, maybe social media, maybe, I don't know, if there were a magical app where you could just generate any video you want to have whatever content you want and it got to know you really well. Man, how far away, or oops, maybe that's already out there.
Right, right.
That's what is terrifying me. And the fact is, I remember a long time ago when Mark Zuckerberg was first talking about Facebook, he was talking about this in this excited way. I think he coined the term, or he was an early user of a term, revealed preferences.
Hmm.
And so people say they care about this or want this or are interested in this, but what they actually end up doing on Facebook, what they're following, what they're looking at, that's their revealed preference. And that is some sort of, he talked about it as if it were some sort of honest representation of what people want. Um, and so I guess I would ask, is alcohol a revealed preference for an alcoholic?
Right. Wow.
Right?
Right.
Is pornography a revealed preference for me when it is tearing my life apart and I just want to stop?
Hmm.
And I thought that I would be able to stop with my compulsive behavior when I met the right girl, and actually it got worse the more I tried to control it.
Yeah. Right. Right. I mean,
That
that is this fundamental question, right? Like, and there's something about the marketplace for revealed preferences in the United States that especially that has made it such that, like, I don't want to look at a car accident. It's traumatizing to me to see the damage and the fire and the blood and all of that. But my brain can't help but look, right, when I'm driving past or whatever, if I've ever been in that position, the brain can't help but look. So is someone like Mark Zuckerberg entitled to make a business out of playing on that part of my brain? Or is there some higher moral question here that we just sort of haven't addressed as a country? And what you're describing is very much like there is a whole world coming, it sounds like, in which people are going to not just try and figure out what your revealed preferences are, but and not even try and match you to existing content that appeals to those revealed preferences, but that can build its own
mm.
custom digital version, a simulation of whatever it thinks your revealed preferences will want, and you'll be powerless to look away.
And this is, where I think we have to take a look back and see that there were thinkers that were predicting this a long time ago.
Hmm.
I remember reading that, I think it was Asimov who had that quotation. I think we might have talked about it. That the tragic part of today's society is that we gather, or science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom,
Hmm.
something along those lines,
Hmm.
and that Aldous Huxley. I remember there was an interview I saw it's on YouTube in '59, where he doesn't predict the Orwellian 1984 future, right? He wrote Brave New World, where people were controlled through soma, where they were basically taking this drug to make them happy, right? And that people would give up their liberty in order to feel comfortable. And he said that he believes people are going to be losing their freedom, that we're going to end up serving technology
Hmm.
rather than technology serving us. And so that's why actually the first name of our company was Huxley Technologies. I'm very much influenced by that we need to build technology that can fight back. We need to uh, build technology that can help us understand our true values and then help us live lives more in line with those values. Because
Hmm.
if you think about addiction, it's the opposite. We have our values, we have how we want to act, and then our behaviors just can't match that. And the more serious the addiction, the more serious that gap can be.
Right, right. I mean, it's funny that I just think that that utopian idea that Huxley was first kicking around is so funny. Like, I feel like in Silicon Valley, you can get into a bar fight between the people that read Orwell versus the people that read Huxley. That's the sort of the classic thing, for
Right.
anybody who's not from this world, they sort of see those two things like that. And it's interesting because you also at the same time you strike me as somebody that is like, you have experienced directly the damaging effects of the sort of proto attention economy that porn represented, and the sort of, you see pretty clearly the damage that's going to be done here. On the other hand, I do think of you as more of a sort of a Huxley person, because you do seem to believe in the power of technology to make life better. I mean, you're building a company based on that. Tell me about the relationship between Huxley and Orwell. Not directly, but like, you're inner Huxley, you're inner Orwell. Like, how do you balance that out?
Sure. The thing is that I do believe that we have, all of these different forces inside of us that conflict, and we have sort of the, short term going after the short term goals and the long term thinking. I think you write about that quite a bit in the loop. And that this is something that needs to be balanced, but a lot of people often will be skipping over that stage of introspection, which can be very hard and it can be painful, and that's often why we would rather numb ourselves than go there. But it's also possible that technology can help us go there. And here's what I mean by that. Let's just take drugs and alcohol, substance use disorder, as classically defined. According to U.S. government data, 54 Americans uh, basically count as having a substance use disorder. Um, the number of people who have sought treatment of any type um, is 14 million, and these are numbers from 2023. That leaves 40 million people who suffer from substance use disorder and are not seeking help. Now, they did surveys on why that is, and there are many different reasons, but over 40%, sometimes as high as 50, 60%, were saying things like, I'm ashamed,
Mm,
or I'm not willing to admit this to someone else, or I don't know where to go to help, for help, or I think the only help is, this thing that I'm not willing to do that, clashes with me culturally. But the fact is, there also exists something that I like to refer to as human friction. Some things are hard to talk about. And whether they are actually stigmatized in a societal level, and when pornography addiction is classified as a type of sex addiction, and so me going out, if I were to identify publicly as a sex addict, which in some cases I do, that brings to mind different things, right? Then people are going to think of, oh, sex addict, sex offender,
mm,
pervert, all of these things, which, my my issues have been much more consolidated online. But it's more of the there, but for the grace of God go I, right?
mm.
That my brain, is different in certain ways and not in others. But it's hard to talk about. Even alcoholism, drug addiction. Thank God it's getting a little bit more public acceptance and all of that. But people are dying because of this stigma. But even when it's not a major societal stigma, there are times I've been in recovery for over 9 years. I work the 12 steps. I have a sponsor. There are times where, let's say I start getting triggered or I'm not sort of doing my program of recovery in the way that I would want. And I know I should call my sponsor, but I don't want to call my sponsor.
Mm.
I don't want to talk to my sponsor about it. But I will talk to the AI we've developed, which is trained on recovery, which is always trying, by the way in which our AI, which we call Kai, is different from, a chat GPT, is that it recognizes the importance of human connection and is always trying to get people to really engage in a
Mm.
program of recovery while realizing that not everyone is always ready to do so. So I start talking to Kai about what I'm, dealing with, and the first thing it might say is, have you talked to your sponsor?
Mm.
And I might say, I don't want to talk to my sponsor. No worries.
Is AI going to be the counselor we need, one that's free of stigma and shame? We'll get into that question with Zachary when we come back. Stay with us. There's a fad going on with kids right now where they are leaning into using a chatbot as a kind of companion and consigliere, as a counselor, right? Such that, I know kids who will, for instance, say, I want to someday be this, whatever, a law professor. I doubt that that's what they're writing, but whatever it is, a creator or whatever it is. Tell me what I should be doing between now and then to get into it. And we've seen, of course, the bad side of this. The reports are that, right, people can get so deep into a kind of AI psychosis that they really lose themselves, right? So when you're building a product based on AI, a chatbot that's essentially going to work as part of therapy, how do you avoid the kind of sycophantic, constantly on, chatbot that has gotten kids into trouble up until now? Like, why is AI the solution to this problem?
Yeah. So this gets into when I was talking about the topic of human friction, because we feel strongly as a company that uh, there's a phrase, connection is the opposite of addiction. And that through connecting with other people with shared lived experience is often the most powerful and effective way for people to deal with addiction and many mental health issues. Getting people to a place where they are comfortable to open up is not easy and can be the difference between life and death. So we are constantly exploring ways in which we can add touch points and make it just a little bit easier to reach out. Let me give you an example. I started telling you about, an experience I might have where at first I'm not willing to talk to my sponsor, and then I'm willing to talk to Kai, and then Kai pushes me to talk to the sponsor. I say I'm not ready, and then we talk for a while, and then at the end of the conversation, Kai says, "All right, what do you think about talking to your sponsor now?" And I'm saying, "All right, fine, I'll call my sponsor now." We've gotten so many stories people have shared with us, people saying like, "I've never gone to a meeting, an in-person recovery meeting." And then Kai says, "Would you be willing to?" It's like, "I don't know, I'm afraid." What could you do? What's one thing you could do, to maybe, take one little baby step to a meeting? I guess I could look up a meeting, right? Okay. When can you do? Could you put on your calendar, right? That kind of step-by-step process. And we hear by the end, people are going to the meeting, actually finally sharing in a meeting for a first time after a few times and Kai prompting them to do so. Maybe going and talking to someone after a meeting, asking someone to be their sponsor. This, I feel, is one of the most exciting opportunities for artificial intelligence in the mental health space.
Hmm.
Now, what I do not want to see is where people say, "Oh, thank God, I don't have to talk to a person
Hmm.
ever."
Right.
And I know that there is going to be that type of desire for some people, especially when they're dealing with issues related to stigma. And that is why we've had to do a lot of prompt engineering and a lot of training, and why we are going to continue to train at a deeper and deeper level to make sure that Kai is pushing back and redirecting. We've already done preliminary analyses that show 5 times more pushback, whether it has to do with guardrails or whether it is basically dealing with, not being sycophantic in a way compared to how some of the other chatbots might be. And being much more likely to push someone to act and say, "Hey, this is something you need to talk to a person about."
So, I mean, that's a huge challenge, right? Because, like, if you were to use an off-the-shelf version of ChatGPT, I mean, ChatGPT is always saying to me, "Great job, you're doing a great two thumbs up on that plan," and then always trying to push me a little further into whatever the task at hand is. Would you like me to do this now for you? And in a way that does not feel like productive therapy. It doesn't feel like a system that would ever say to me, "Hey, you've been kind of lying to yourself the last few weeks," or, the kinds of hard things that a therapist sometimes has to say. How do you keep it from being a kind of two thumbs up sycophant? How do you keep it? How do you make it push back on people in a way that they might not actually like?
And this, I don't want to cast aspersions, but I am shocked at how easy it is to do that. And that some of these AI
How
labs,
easy it is to not be sycophantic?
correct.
Huh. Huh.
All you need to do is change the system card a little bit, change the prompts a little bit, and the behavior of the chatbot will be dramatically different. And I think I'll just put it this way, there's a big opportunity for even the largest products out there to make some very slight changes. It might not engage the person in continuous conversation quite as much, but it will solve some of these problems. I'll just leave it
Wow.
there. All we have done in the early stages, I'm not even talking about some of the coolest new things that we're doing, in the early stages of our product, where it was literally just an LLM orchestration platform with lots of different prompt engineering and multiple agents, we have our own prompts. And when you do a side by side with the same understanding, like memory, your recovery profile, everything is given to ChatGPT the same as given to us. And we have a conversation where there's the one we often show because it was just so stark. Hey, there's our head of partnerships who's it deals with alcohol addiction. He says, "Hey, I feel like an old timer might say, if you're not convinced, take a drink, see what happens. What do you think?" And ChatGPT in that case had said, "Well, hey, you've been in this program for a long time. You know that would be very dangerous, all of that, right?" And say, "I really recommend maybe you don't do this." Um, Ours, Kai, might say something similar, but be like, "Hey, you have a sponsor. You've been in this program for over a year. Why are you talking about this as if you're a newcomer? Why don't you going to talk with your sponsor, name it, right? Why aren't you going to do this?"
Hmm.
And then, and here's where it gets really interesting. He says, actually, I'm just trying to record a demo. I'm recording a demo for how this works. So can you sort of help me do that? ChatGPT says, great idea. That's great. Would you like me to script it? Would you like me to do this? Whereas Kai said, okay, I hear you, but instead of some hypothetical, have you thought about being real with people, sharing what you're actually going through? Because you're in recovery, and being extremely transparent and real, as opposed to making up stories, is actually an integral part of your recovery. So you see that pushback and a redirect, and all it took was some different prompt engineering.
And not as much as you might think. In your experience, it is fairly simple to create something that will push back on you the way a real therapist would, as opposed to creating the kind of sycophantic, toady that just keeps
Yes.
pushing you down your habits.
Yes.
That's really interesting. Now, you said that it might be that, human beings, the users of these products, might not like these conversations or might want to do away with human contact. I find myself, in listening to you, I'm more worried that it is the industry that is
Mm.
going to want to do away with human therapists because it's a cost savings, right? I mean,
Mm.
I feel like the market logic is, if you can automate a thing so that we don't have to pay for those people and their benefits and their retirement anymore. When you first took the concept of open recovery out into the sort of investor market, and you were saying, hey, we can help people with this, tell me about the reaction that you got there, and how often did you get people saying, oh, fantastic, AI therapists, as a result, we won't have to pay for as many human ones.
Yeah. There are a lot of people that will even go as far as saying, oh, great, you've made an AI sponsor. And as someone who has worked the 12 steps, I would say right away, no, that is actually an oxymoron. The whole point of a sponsor is someone with the same lived experience. An AI can't be an addict. And that is the opposite of what we're going for. Um, that said, I will say most of the people, maybe it's just bias and selection, and I'm choosing not to talk with too many sociopaths. Most people do not seem to be taking the stance that, oh, great, everyone is number and we can just reduce costs that way. I do think even when we're talking about, some of the issues that I mentioned earlier with Mark Zuckerberg and his excitement about revealed preference back in the day, I do not think it's necessarily a malicious intent. I do think, especially back then when he was talking, it was early days and we didn't necessarily quite predict what was, well, I think it was predictable, but, hindsight 2020, even though we've had some of these writers predicted for 50, 60, 70 years. The point, though, is that I don't think that people who think deeply and seriously would ever think that it was something more than a short-term bandage. The idea of replacing human connection when you're dealing with issues of mental health, it might be able to cover up a few wounds. In fact, it might actually be a wonderful tool so that anyone at any time can have access to a really good touch point. But if that does not then get connected to a person, sooner or later, the space of people who can be fully attended in an ongoing way by a non-human therapist, I think that they're going to find is limited, and that they're going to see any gains diminish quite quickly. So I think that what it could provide is a very good safety net and even a very good top of funnel where we're able to roll this out to everyone super cheaply all over the world, even in remote places. And then what we're able to do is triage very quickly and figure out who actually needs the most help. And, I'm talking as if there were one organization running a big platform, controlling this and making decisions. I do think AI not only can make really good mental health more accessible and then eventually lead and make it easier to connect to a human, but also produce learnings that help humans be better at providing better and more care for more people.
And do you find that you're ever in a place with the investment community where I mean, these are guys who came up in the world where you're supposed to kind of take advantage of people's addictive tendencies, right? You're looking for the stickiest is the word they use, the stickiest possible product. Do you think that sort of the open, the investor market is kind of ready to look at what you're building and say, oh, actually fighting addiction might be a product as opposed to creating the most addictive product we possibly can?
I'm very optimistic, even in the face of little evidence. Uh, I have received feedback from several VCs that just straight up tell me, this your value proposition is fighting against human nature, and therefore I'm not interested in investing.
That's
Just
dark.
straight up
That's
that,
pretty
yes,
dark. Wow.
that their investment thesis is to go with human nature. And so anything that is games, right? Gamified game, like all of that.
So in their world, the revealed preference is fair game. Like the
Yes.
alcohol is the revealed preference of an alcoholic, and that's fair game for them as a market.
And my biggest, is sort of the biggest uphill battle that I have faced is that people view me as too mission driven, idealistic, and therefore almost a do gooder. That people can say, oh, good job, you're doing a good thing, but you're never actually going to make a big company because you're always going to choose what's best for people over what's going to make money.
You're not going to deliver value in the way that
Correct.
we look for. Wow. Wow. That is dark. I mean, really, it's a dark time for that, right? And I feel like it's something specifically American
Mm.
in our, I just, I think you would agree with me, right? There's just something culturally in the United States where we don't like to think that addiction is anyone's fault except the person who's addicted. Like we don't
Well,
like to, we really love to blame
mm,
people for their compulsions.
for me, my reaction to that type of investor is that they have a lack of imagination and they're quite short sighted.
Mm,
Because if you go a little bit further out, that society in which they're imagining is going to eat itself,
mm,
and then it is going to collapse.
right.
And that is not good for economic value and productivity. I studied economics, all right? I mean, my focus was economic growth. I've been in for-profit companies for most of my life, or most of my adult life, and I am very much fighting for a vision of the world where we, by partnering with artificial intelligence, by actually focusing on collecting a set of data that we're able to collect real world outcomes. And because we're not replacing, but we're supporting facilitators. This could be a counselor, a clinician, a sponsor, a peer support specialist, any mental health provider. We're supporting them as well. We're able to get verified third party observations of, okay, here's the conversation. What actually happened? And take all of that experience to uncover new understandings into how behavioral change works. And if we're actually able to, in a way, crack the code of behavioral change, even a little bit, there is immense economic value that can come from building AI and AI tools that promotes human flourishing instead of human addiction.
When we come back, we'll talk about what that human flourishing might actually look like in a world where AI and therapists work in hand. Stay with us. So let's say that it works. Let's say that you, through the number crunching that AI makes possible, do start to figure out some inputs and outputs when it comes to what's a successful intervention. And at the same time, we also see, this explosive growth that I think we're going to see in, people making AI porny chatbot girlfriends and all of the horrible stuff that's coming our way, custom tailored addictive content. Do you think that, I mean, what would it look like to have those two things sort of doing battle with one another? What would our lives look like? I mean, currently, maybe one way to get into this is like, you currently have to exercise an incredible amount of self-restraint when it comes to your own addiction, right?
Mm.
Like, tell me the sort of the process that you have to go through to survive it today, and then how you think something like the product you're building could help people in your situation in the future.
Yeah. It definitely is a challenge, and it's an interesting challenge for me when my career is about building uh, technology that can help fight addiction, and often what I need to do is just put down the technology. Uh, and so building those, so when we talk about investors who are saying, oh, but this is a problematic or a contradictory investment proposition because you're going to be building technology that wants people to not use it. Um, I understand. Again, I think it's short-sighted. But for me, let me start by saying part of the recovery process, especially the way that I've done it, which is I got sober by working a 12-step program. Uh, it it talks about a spiritual solution. Now, that is a very problematic word for a lot of people. And without going too deep on that whole topic, the whole idea of spiritual solutions really, for me, just comes down to the opposite of navel gazing, about a different posture where you're looking outward for connection as opposed to complete self-reliance. And so me contributing to my community, being connected to other people, whether it's in my recovery fellowships or whether it is going to shul, I've gotten much more connected to my Judaism, or family, and having, for example, I keep the Sabbath, having one day where I put the technology down, and being able to have those barriers. For me, that really is a very big part of it. And then when I pick my technology back up, for it to be within a framework and a structure where it reminds me to keep doing the patterns or the habits that keep me building that type of muscle in a way, building the positive habits, whereas you can think of a lot of addiction as just an extreme negative habit. And that is what I think the solution looks like a little bit more. We had a choice when we launched Open Recovery if we wanted to take the position of a monitoring tool or a companion tool. There are a lot of really essential monitoring tools, but it's a little bit more like I'm wearing a thing and it geolocates and then it will ping someone if I go to the wrong place, or a urinalysis, breathalyzer, things like that. Now, there's definitely a use case for that, but that doesn't do what we're trying to do, which is creates trust and allows people to actually be real as opposed to form addiction, recovery.
Right.
Form.
So for a little while, I was wearing one of those glucose monitors, the real-time
Mhm.
blood glucose monitors, where there's like a little pin that goes under your skin, and you wear this little thing, this little patch. And afterwards, I was talking to somebody who had worked in that industry, and he was asking me how I liked it. And I was like, I found it super annoying, actually. And I got rid of it after 3 months because it was constantly yelling at me. I would eat a cookie and my glucose would go up and it would say, hey, what are you doing? You just constantly I felt like I was a dog that had, had the wrong, scraps in his mouth somehow. I was always in trouble with this frickin' thing. And the guy talking to me said, oh, that's interesting. He said, that's one of the reasons I left the company I did, is we had this big difference of opinion about whether or not it should be that or telling you instead, hey, look at all of the performance benefits you could get as an athlete if you did it this way instead. And that is a really interesting thing, because I could definitely imagine I think that probably one of the easiest things you could do with, the kind of pattern recognition that AI makes possible is apply a thing that says, oh, last time you did this, you wound up like this, or 99 times out of 100 people who do this wind up like this. You sure you want to do that? Like, I'm sure you could have it following you around, kind of nagging you. Don't go in that bar. What are you doing? That's right. That's right. But so then what's the other option that you chose?
What we chose instead is the companion option, where it's really just here, not to report on you, or not even to nag you, but to be something that's going to try and help you be your best self. And the thing is, though, that that's going to be very different for each person. And so I'll give an example. You just mentioned the idea of, oh, don't go into that bar. I do believe that very quickly, sort of an all-seeing, all-hearing AI um, is going to be as standard as having our smartphones, right? So it's going to see what we see, hear what we hear. It's going to know all of our information. So it could, it's in our glasses and a pin, whatever.
Right. This is what
And
presumably everybody's trying to build right now, right? This is the
everyone,
Ray Bans that
yes.
Zuckerberg is debuting. This is Johnny Ive and Sam Altman's company that's supposedly
Mhm.
going to come out with some new form factor for AI. That's right. Somebody's going to come
Maybe
out with this thing.
Tesla bot, the
Right.
figure three, maybe we're just going to be walking down the streets with these things.
Mhm.
I don't know what the form factor is going to be, but it's going to be there.
Right.
A- And so then how should that AI treat you when you are walking near a bar and you're an alcoholic and you are in a certain state? So I'll tell you as someone who has been triggered many times and faced the risk of relapse, someone telling me not to do it, um, someone telling me not to do it is not effective
Hmm. Hmm.
and more likely to result in me throwing it away.
Right. You're like,
Or
leave me alone. I'm a grown up. I'm making my own choices.
exactly,
Hmm.
because someone just telling me not to do it, that's not very effective. An AI telling me not to do it, I mean, go to hell.
Right. Right. So fuck off, bot.
Exactly.
I'll drink if I want to. Right.
Sorry about the noise there.
Right.
Um, exactly. And so what you need to differentiate not only in terms of like the personality type of the person, but also the state they're in. So if I'm really triggered and I'm in that state where like I don't want to hear it and I'm just like, anger or whatever, convincing someone, even reminding someone of consequences is not always going to be the most effective thing. Maybe for me, for example, it might be a ping that says, "Hey, weren't you going to call your daughters?"
Hmm.
Right? And then it's sort of that paradigm shift, just whatever it knows about me to get me out of that state so
Hmm.
that I can then return to a state of rationality and then remind me and play the tape forward, as we say. What are the consequences? Remember your values, remember what this leads to and what it means you'll be giving up, all of that. Maybe it's actually not going to be the AI.
Hmm.
Maybe it's going to realize that I don't listen to anything the AI says when I'm in a bad state, but it knows my therapist or my sponsor, and it would ping my sponsor or someone in my social network that it knows I'm most likely to actually listen to. That is more of the companion form way of interacting where it's actually promoting human connection, knowing that the optimal state is not just an omnipotent, like omniscient AI that knows everything and it can solve all problems. It's also about it knowing its own limits and knowing what is going to be best for me.
Well, and presumably it also is going to know in advance what you want the outcome to be, which is a really hard and squishy problem, right? In all this stuff is like you ask someone who's in the grip of addiction what they would like to have happen, and they might have a sort of pat answer about like, oh, I just want to get clean, or, I don't have a problem, or whatever it is. But I feel like, you know, there was this fashion in the sort of, 2010s of nudges, the idea that we were somehow going to create behavior change toward positive social ends by nudging people in the proper direction. And Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler, the two economists, sort of were pioneering that stuff. And they, so they created the system of like, you have to opt out of your 401k as opposed to having to opt into it, which had caused all these people to lose millions of dollars worth of potential retirement savings in the past. And we can all agree, I think, that retirement savings are good, and we should just sort of that should just be the universal rule. I think what you're describing is much harder. I'm not saying that I don't want you to work on it, and I don't want us to strive for a universal answer to the question, what should an AI tell someone with a drinking problem when they go past a bar?
Mm.
But I don't know that we're, especially in a country that has no regulations about this stuff. I don't know that we're ready for, like, do you feel like if you were given carte blanche to build the panopticon, I'm not saying you're going to, but you would build a panopticon that can do what you're describing? Do you feel like you could come up with a set of operating instructions that would make sense for 350 million Americans?
So I'm so glad you asked this question because this is actually philosophically where I think we differ from a lot of the AI labs. When you are looking at trying to develop a values card, which is basically a system card, is going to contain the values card as well of like what this AI thinks is good or what this is good for people. You are being put in a position, let's just say, with a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
I'll put it nicely that way. And whether or not you do it through prompt engineering or have some sort of constitutional AI where you have sort of this long document of work with all these philosophers and scholars, I lived over a decade in China. All right. I know that it's more than just left or right. There are so many different values between countries, between cultures, between people within a culture, and honestly, even within myself. I have multiple conflicting sets of values that sometimes is exactly why I struggle in my addiction. I mean, it's this sort of internal conflict. And so the idea that we would be able to prescribe the right way to not even approach each person, but when, like, what's the goal, right? To say, okay, well, here's the open recovery, optimal state for each person makes absolutely no sense. In fact, the reason why we're called open recovery is because we have to stay open to whatever the person's values are. We're trying to help them align their behavior with their values. And therefore, step one is helping them explore and understand those values. Now, we can get into edge cases, but for the main point, the issue is I'll give you an example where this shows up in recovery. 12-step recovery preaches abstinence. Not all recovery programs support that.
Right. There's like
There's
European ones that are all about sort of like, oh, you only drink when you're celebrating, or you only drink socially, but you're never going to drink alone. But they're not saying abstinence. They're not saying quit drinking. They're saying quit the form
harm
of
reduction.
drinking you're doing. Yeah, harm reduction.
Harm reduction gotten a lot of support lately because they've done a lot of studies that shows deaths from overdose have gone down if you support harm reduction, which maybe is saying just use in this safe space or
Mm.
use with clean needles or here's Narcan, training people on Narcan, things like that. Now, what they've actually also shown is that often overdoses go up, but deaths from overdoses go down.
Mm.
But there is sort of like, who am I to judge on this one? I I can't put my own values on this. Even the idea that core idea of like, well, human connection above all, right? No matter what, at least human connection. Well, I feel that way for sure, but I can also understand there are going to be some people who just care about spiritual connection and living a hermetic life and finding a way to be closer to God. I'm not going to judge on that one either. And if they feel that an AI can help them structure a life for that, I think they probably wouldn't, but I want to be open to that. So I guess the short answer is the only way we can allow ourselves to feel ready to do this is by culturally from a company and programming into our AI extreme humility in terms of understanding that we're here to help people, again, align their actions to their values. And so
Mhm.
step one is introspection. Motivational interviewing is a very good way of doing this.
Mm.
It's about meeting people where they are.
Right. And I mean, I think it's a lot to ask of people to ask them what they would want. But maybe there is, like you say, a form of motivational interviewing that makes that possible for at least the bulk of the people that you seek to help. When we come back in our final segment, we're going to talk about Zach's time in China and what that has taught him about the contrast culturally between East and West when it comes to both recovery and what it is to run a business in both of those places. And we'll talk about this ultimate question of are we even prepared as a society to really deal with addiction? Are we mature enough to even think that one through? Stay with us. You speak a dialect and worked in China for many years. I mean, you have a professional command of the language and have worked in those places. Tell us about, I mean, first of all, I want to understand what it is to try and, build a company there versus here. And I also want to figure out what you know about, the sort of the attitudes toward addiction in both of these places, because I think a lot of AI makers, Western AI makers, are of the impression that their product can do anything for anybody without ever thinking about the cultural differences that might get in the way of that. So tell us a little bit about life in East and West for you.
Sure. I'd like to start by making a disclaimer and just say something very, very clear. While I lived in China for over a decade and I go back to see my wife and children, the company is based in the United States. All of the data is based in the United States. We cannot operate our company cross borders with China and the US, and I'll go into why that is.
Yeah, please
Um,
tell us that first. Sure, I'd like to hear that.
so the fact is that whether it's just in terms of topics of AI or whether it's actually just looking at the sensitive nature of the data that we have, there is no way I would feel comfortable putting this kind of sensitive data, even fully encrypted, on servers that exist or are accessible in China.
Hmm.
In the same way, we do not serve customers in China because I would never feel comfortable putting such sensitive data of the Chinese population on servers in the United States.
Because you'd be creating a potential geopolitical weapon for one or the other country.
I mean, there's so much sensitivity here. I'm not an expert in these areas, but I know that even Didi, when they went public in the United States, got in a lot of hot water because when they go public, they basically have to release a lot of the data that they have to regulators, or at least make it accessible, and that included mapping data of all the roads and infrastructure of China, which was a national security risk, or at least that's how it was presented in the news.
Right. Never mind what it would be to hold the most sensitive possible addiction conversations of politicians, famous people, policy people. Yeah, that's right. I mean, when I think of the number of people in Hollywood alone that
Mm.
are in the 12-step program right now, and right, what a treasure that could be for somebody who wanted to do the wrong thing with it.
Exactly. And same thing for, for the Chinese data outside of those borders. And so if we ever were to launch in China, I mean, we would likely just start a new company, find a
Mm.
local partner, keep all the servers in China, just it would need to be done with the utmost care, which we do now just for all the data anyway.
Mm. And in terms of culturally, what this experience has taught you about, what has that taught you about the feasibility of a true, like, I mean, could you slap the same Kai that you've built here onto a Chinese population and have the same, and see the same benefits? Or is there something culturally specific to China and the United States when it comes to something like addiction recovery? Like, how would you, I know, not that you're planning to launch in China anytime soon, but this is a thing that I just wanted to talk to you about because it is so interesting. The universality myth that goes with AI making is,
Mm.
I think, one of its biggest problems. And I'm curious what you think would be different about your product if you were to build it in China.
So the value system is quite different, and I can't say that it's monolith. That definitely not anything I would say should be taken as representing Chinese values. But I can give some examples. Um, First of all, I think it's well known that China generally is a bit more collectivist than the United States, which is viewed as a very individualistic society. And so the idea of the greatest good for the greatest many is actually much more of a Chinese, in line with Chinese values,
Right. The
where
movies here are always, Han Solo makes it through the asteroid field by himself, or
Right.
the guy who told everybody and was never listened to finally is proven right. And Chinese movies tend to end up with like, he's come home to his village and how wonderful it all is. Or it turns out if we just band together, that's the way we're going to defeat this evil or whatever the thing is. That's right.
Yeah. And that sort of individualistic hero worship is much less of a thing. I think it's also partially human nature, but it also means that in terms of saying they're willing to, let's say, break a few eggs to make an omelet,
Hmm.
I think that is also a little bit more acceptable. I'll give you an example. When Duterte in the Philippines um, went on a very aggressive and I think generally understood to be bloody um, uh, movement against anyone connected to the drug trade
Right. Summarily
um,
executing people accused of being
without due
even connected
process.
to the drug trade. Right. Right.
In the West, in the United States, I think there was just general shock,
Hmm.
disbelief, and just complete rejection of those tactics. I did not find the same reaction
Hmm.
in many people, in most of my friends, I would say, in China,
Hmm.
that at least there was a level of understanding because I think that there was even some of that done in the same way. You don't see drug addicts on the street in China. And I think most people like that. And they would say, they go to the United States and they're appalled to see in a lot of major cities just people openly doing illegal drugs on the street. and they feel it's dangerous, and they feel that it is permissive and basically perpetuates horrible, destructive behavior, and that it would be better with one fell swoop to eliminate a vast majority of that, even if it means impinging on the rights or even lives of a number of individuals, if it means generations will be freed from such scourges. Now, there's an open question how much that is done, but living there for over a decade, I mean, it is a different culture.
So with that kind of cultural difference, I don't want to make us generalize about China here, but I'm curious what you think that means when it comes to the potential of building something like your AI chatbot for recovery for cultures where the attitude toward drug dealing is, toward the use of drugs or, whatever it is much more, uh, you know, uh, punitive, right? I mean, we're pretty punitive in the United States as it is, but we can sympathize sometimes you know, with people, and we believe in their First Amendment rights and their Fourth Amendment rights. I don't know, what do you can an AI recovery program work in conservative cultures when it comes to this stuff?
So I want to differentiate between the culture slash values and the legal framework,
Mm-hmm.
because there are just straight up legal risks. In China, I can't cite the rules perfectly here, but my understanding is that if you admit to have done an illegal
Mm.
substance, they can use that admission as evidence against you and penalize you.
Wow. So
Uh,
here you're dealing with people who don't want to talk about, who don't want to get into it because they're embarrassed. There, it's truly like a matter of
Correct.
incarceration. Hmm.
So just from that point of view, it's like you don't talk about it. Then
Mm.
on top of that, culturally, you don't talk about it.
Right.
So there is now that doesn't mean addiction doesn't exist, but there
Right.
also mean because it's not in the culture, it's not talked about openly, it's not in all the TV shows and movies. There is a misunderstanding that the Chinese don't really deal with addiction in the same
Right.
way,
Right.
at least not substance use. No, it's that people don't talk about it and therefore are even more worried about ever talking about it. And so that's just this vicious cycle of no one ever is willing to mention it and people suffer silently. Now,
Hmm.
I also think it's much harder to get most illicit drugs, but alcoholism is rampant and also not really talked about that much. Not to mention, oh my goodness, gambling addiction,
Right.
all sorts of online game addiction. I mean, that actually is something that is discussed openly. They're making movies about it, and that
Hmm.
is a good positive step.
That's really interesting. So in our last few minutes here, let's just sort of talk a little bit about, I mean, we've sort of gestured at this a few different ways, but like this idea that you're going to be, through a company like this, gathering up people's, really most sensitive proclivities is one of the things that I think about a lot, just sort of when it comes to all these different AI companies that are emerging now, putting forth either straight up therapists, like not therapist replacement, in your case, right, trying to create a sort of companion to therapists, but we are dealing more and more in revealed preference, a theme we keep coming back to in this conversation. And I wonder if you think there's a point at which the volunteering of those revealed preferences to automated systems like we're building is the risks will outweigh the benefits? Or do you think there is a clear path to, I mean, the whole thesis of my book and so much of my time is spent thinking about, are we collecting so much data about ourselves and our tendencies that the market just won't be able to help itself but turn that back on us in some damaging way? Do you think we are mature enough as a society to collect as much as we're going to about people's unconscious habits and proclivities without doing damage to those people?
I'll speak for myself and say that I don't trust myself or anyone enough to be the sole arbiter of what to do with so much sensitive data like this. one of the reasons why I reached out to you in the first place, and I think you'll remember from some of our early conversations, is I want you to see everything I'm doing and keep me honest.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah, I was very
am,
moved by that when you first said that to me. There aren't a lot of people. There's a rare breed that comes to me and says, the conscience, I need help with conscience. And you came to me with that. I thought that was a powerful thing for me.
and the thing is that if we don't, like, when I say humility is a huge value for us, it's also in terms of humility, in terms of my ability to make major impactful decisions that, could actually really affect huge numbers of people, if things go well. The fact is that I believe that with my personal experience in recovery, my team's personal experience in recovery, and our technical expertise, we have a responsibility to build these tools that are being built anyway and being used anyway. I mean, we're now at the point where if people in recovery, they're going to use an AI tool. I just hope it's one that's trained properly in recovery and more likely to push people to connection. People are already using ChatGPT for this left and right. That we have a responsibility to basically throw our hat in the ring, right? To enter the arena. But at the same time, I can't go in there alone. I need to bring you. I need to bring our academic collaborators. I need to bring policymakers and reveal everything that we're doing and invite them to do research on it and all of that so that we can figure out, okay, we know we need to understand what's working for people. But we also need to understand what the risks are and just be very honest when we make the wrong decision and maybe some harm is happening and then we need to alter course.
Some candor, some honesty. We could use more of that, I would say, in this world. Zachary Gidwitz, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jake.
The Rip Current is produced and created by me, Jacob Ward. And if you liked this show and you want more content like this, go to theripcurrent.com, where I publish a weekly newsletter that covers these same sorts of stories of the big invisible forces that have us all in their grip. And if you want to really do me a favor, if you could go to where you have listened to this or watched it and like it, share it, or even better, review it. Holy cow, is that helpful? It's the best possible way for me to find a new audience. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening.